Let me ask you this. When you listen to this podcast or any other podcast about the ocean or wildlife or conservation in general, do you ever say, man, I wish I can do this? I really want to do this. I want to do what Andrew's doing. I want to do what all the other people are doing. I want to do science communication. I just don't know where and how to do it. I'm going to give you a reason why you should. It's a really important reason. It's something that we don't often discuss. It gets discussed every once in a while, and I almost feel like it's implied, but not a lot of people see why it's actually so important, especially these days when anybody can communicate about anything, whether it's good information or bad information. We're going to talk about that on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I am your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And on today's episode, we're going to actually talk about how you can speak up for the ocean and why it's important that you speak up for the ocean. The people who've been listening to this podcast, and if you're listening to this right now, if this is the first time you're listening, or this is your second time, or this is your 100th time, or this is your 1484th time, because that's how many episodes we have, you've known what sort of the process is and how I talk about the ocean. You've been informed through other sources, but also this source of what's happening in the ocean and all that stuff that I talk about at the beginning. And it's important because I try and bring you the facts as I see them. As a scientist, as a conservationist, as somebody who feels it's important to bring out the straight facts. And I've been watching videos lately online of different things that's happening in the ocean. And two things in particular that have really kind of stressed me out is watching people talk about how orcas are, quote unquote, playing with boats, in the Strait of Gibraltar. And the sea otter story that I covered on Monday, how, sea otters are, quote unquote, attacking the surfers when it was really a surfboard or a couple surfboards. And the way a lot of people were talking about the news story that were not scientists or ocean conservationists, it really irked me the wrong way, because they were talking about how, these are attacks, like orcas are attacking people. They're trying to kill people because of what we've done to the ocean and what we're doing to them and the captivity, and they're taking their revenge and all this kind of, sort of hysterical kind of rhetoric that's supposed to make you fear them, supposed to make you panic. Watching an orca in the wild, I've never had the opportunity. It's something on my bucket list. Is probably one of the best things that a person can do to really see what an orca is like. You get the awe-inspiring feeling of seeing an orca. I've seen marine mammals in the wild before. I've seen whales, I've seen seals and sea lions, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's an amazing sight to see. You feel good about yourself when you see them, especially if it's a good experience. To see a whale that big is phenomenal. There's so many good feelings that come up. It's all the feels. But when you start to have these conversations and you start to see these short form content pieces on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube Shorts, or even long pieces, like long form pieces on YouTube and even on podcasts, and you start to hear that rhetoric of that message of that orcas are attacking people, they're after people, that's going to put fear into people. Just like we see on Shark Week, and that's one of the biggest criticisms that I've had, and a lot of other people have had about Shark Week. It's always about the stories of the shark attack and the shark attack, when sharks attack, serial killer sharks, all this type of thing, rogue sharks and stuff like that. When you start to hear that type of messaging, you're gonna start to fear them. Instead of being in awe of all their attributes and how they become an efficient predator, the fear is always going to be there because they're a predator. Even with orcas, like if I'm in the water with an orca, I would fear that. I would not get in the water with an orca. People have, and people do, and that's fine for them. I don't want to be in there. That's just for me. However, I want to be as close as I can, from a regulation standpoint, get to see an orca in the wild, because I think it would be really fun. But when you start to hear the messaging of they're after people, they're going to start attacking, people get scared. And when people get scared, they care less about the species. They care less about their well-being. We need these animals. We need people to care about these animals. And right now with marine mammals, most people love marine mammals. Sharks, it's still 60-40. People love them, people don't. I meet a lot of people who love sharks, but it's not, it's still like I'm biased. I have a bit of a bias because I meet a lot of scientists who love sharks, and I host a podcast about sharks. So I talk to a lot of people who are liking sharks. So if I did a full survey though of like random people on the street, if they fear sharks or not, I'm saying it's going to be 50-50 at best, right? And I almost feel like the fear would almost take over, because I've met a lot of people who would not get in the water with a shark, whether it's cage diving or whether it's just, snorkeling or scuba diving or anything like that. They would prefer not to. And that's fine. That's perfectly up to them. But there's still that fear. There's Jaws, and there's this messaging through Shark Week about shark attacks and how, you should fear them, and the music that goes behind them, and it kind of makes it scary and all this kind of stuff, even though they're beautiful, wonderful animals. They're just a predator. But we just keep putting them in that kind of light. And so for years, people have killed sharks, and not a lot of people have cared about protecting sharks because of that type of messaging. We're seeing the same thing about orcas, and we could see the same thing about sea otters. Let's take, for instance, if you don't believe me, take, for instance, stingrays. After Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, died from a stingray, those stingrays in Australia were being killed. Stingrays in general were being killed. And I remember covering a story. I don't remember when it was, but I remember covering a story about it, saying that people cared. They feared them more, and they want to kill them more. This is like this messaging. We always see this, and we see this in politics all the time. When you want to defame someone or you want to defame a policy, you start talking about it in a negative way, whether it's right or wrong. It does not matter. Right? It's all that matters these days online and even in politics is the amount of views and clicks and the amount of support you're going to get. Right? Because it doesn't matter if you're on the right side or the left side of the political aisle. If you are not in government, you're doing everything you can to defame the people in power so that you can get in power the next way off. That's just the way it goes. Right? But now it's even getting worse and worse when you look at politics and sort of the innuendos and all these like just the messaging in the ads and during politics and here in Canada in the House of Commons, it just gets tiring, but that messaging grows and grows and grows until people start to get aggressive. Case in point, this past couple of days ago, in Canada, our Prime Minister is Trudeau, right? And some people hate him to the point where they have flags where they're saying F Trudeau, and they have it in the back of their pickup trucks, and they're doing it on a regular basis. They just install them in their pickup trucks and they drive them down the streets and they drive them to work and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of crazy to see the amount of hate one prime minister get when, to be honest, our country's is in pretty decent shape, all things considered. But people hate him. And there's been this rhetoric. The opposition have been started talking about, messaging. He's not a good leader. He's done this. Inflation's his problem. He's done this. He's done that. He's done that. You may not like a prime minister. I didn't like the prime minister we had before this. It's just the way it is. I didn't put a flag up on my car saying F that prime minister. That's just not the way I roll. That's fine. Some people have it, but then more and more people are having it, and more people are talking about hating him and hating him and hating him. And then he was out in Belleville, Ontario, not like a small town, and there was a protest, and there's people in his face yelling at him, cursing him out, saying he should be in jail, this and that. And it's all because this rhetoric, this messaging gets there, and it gets people enraged to the point where they're going to come out. Like, I can understand if our country was in the crapper. I guess maybe these people think that's happening. And I don't want to get too political, but it's a prime minister who hasn't really done anything that terrible. You know what I mean? You may not like the policies. You may not like the fact that he didn't follow through on some policies and did on others, and you may not like that. Maybe he spent too much. Maybe you thought that. That's fine. But to the point where you go out of your way to yell right in their face that he should be in jail, it boggles my mind. But the messaging, it hits people like that. Maybe people who are down on their luck. Maybe people who are already angry, and then all of a sudden they go out and do this kind of stuff. Same thing for when you talk about animals. When you talk about animals in a bad light, or you start to put it in a bad light, that it becomes a problem. Now, I've given you enough examples, so I'm going to talk about why I did this podcast, why I got inspired to do this podcast. Because we need people like you to do the podcast, to do a podcast, or to do a TikTok video, or have a TikTok account, or an Instagram account, or a YouTube channel. Because you need to be putting out the right information. Not just me, not just the other people who are doing it right now. Everybody needs to be doing it. We need more and more people to do it. It's extremely important, because if you don't, somebody's going to put out information that is wrong. Somebody's going to put out information that they get from some other source that's a conspiracy theory. That's what's going to happen. It's going to continue to happen. And we need to counterbalance that. As scientists, as conservationists, as people who love the earth, you take the real facts and you present them for the people who really want to know. It's very difficult to get information that you can trust. And it's my job as a science communicator to provide you with things that are trustworthy, to provide you with information that say, hey, you know what? I heard on the How to Protect the Ocean podcast about this story about a sea otter, and it was biting a board. It wasn't attacking a surfer. Nobody got hurt. This and that. Monterey Bay Aquarium knows the sea otter and all that kind of stuff, right? You provide them with the right information so that they trust you. When they hear the information, they can trust it. And when they fact check the information, you provide sources and all that kind of stuff. And when I'm wrong, because yes, I can be wrong, I admit it, because I don't want to give you the perception that I'm just giving you information. And my pride is going to stop me from apologizing for potentially giving you the wrong information at some point in time. Right? That's the trust I build. And that's the trust as all communicators. It doesn't matter if you're science, whether you're wildlife science or pharmaceutical, it's always important to put out the real information. That information that is fact, that information that can be cited, that information where somebody can go there. Some people ask me questions, and sometimes I have to say, I don't know the answer to that. Let me look it up, or you can talk to this person instead, because they're more of an expert, right? I feel like when we are so used to getting the information at the palm of our hands whenever we want, sometimes, we take it for granted of who's actually providing that information. And so what worries me is that we're getting information or people are getting information from others who are providing that information as a creator to just get clicks and follows. Most of the people that I saw give wrong information or give that sensationalized information about the orcas were people who had, short form, quote unquote, news accounts. But they were like sensationalized news. It's like, what can give you a click? Like really good marketers. Right? That bring you that hook. Like when you're in short form content as a communicator, you have to bring in that hook that will get people to stop scrolling, right? Stop scrolling to the next video or the next 3 or 4 videos, right? So you have to bring in that hook. Orcas attacking people. Well, that's going to stop me, right? I want to know more about that. And so it's just, it's like the gossip columns of the ocean. And people want to hear the controversies, the conspiracies. They want to hear it because it's entertaining to them. And especially from a fear perspective, it gets that emotional fear out of you. It targets that belly, as Randy Olson says, right? Dr. Randy Olson, who does the Don't Be Such a Scientist, always says when you're communicating, target the belly, target the emotions of the person. Well, fear is an emotion. Fear is how someone feels. And when they feel fear, it's real. Countries prey upon that, and media preys upon it as well, including people on social media. Instead of the hope and the optimism of oceans, like this sea otter story is a really interesting story, but it's also a very opportunistic time to bring about sort of the conservation story of the sea otter to the forefront. That's how I approached it, right? We don't know much information about what was going on and why that sea otter took bites out of some surfboards, but we can start to talk about the plight and the conservation story, the conservation success story of the sea otter. From 50 to 3,000, individuals. That's pretty good, right? But people are going to sensationalize it, and people have, and they started saying, oh, now the sea otters and the orcas are teaming up together to go out and hurt humans for destroying their environment and killing them. Well, the orcas are near the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. The sea otters are in the Pacific. They're not talking to each other. So it doesn't make sense. But people know orcas are in the Pacific, so maybe they're thinking that. I don't know. But it doesn't make sense. So this is why it's so important for scientists and conservationists to go out, get the facts, and start accounts. Start podcasting. Start doing YouTube channels. Start doing short-form content on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube Shorts. It's extremely important. You don't have to make a ton of money doing this, or any money. You can do it as a hobby, but get that information out there. If you love the ocean and you love the animals in the ocean, get the right information out there. It's not difficult. If you don't know, or you're not a scientist, or you're not a conservationist and you're worried about it, do interviews with scientists and conservationists. Do interviews to fact check. It's what the media does. They go out and they find the first person that will be able to provide information. My co-host, Dr. David Ebert, that I co-host with on the Beyond Jaws podcast, was a scientist that people in the Santa Cruz area, the ABC, CBS, MNBC, all those, they went to him because he was a guy who said, yeah, I'll talk about sea otters. I know enough about sea otters that I can talk about it. He's a shark guy, but he can talk about it because he knows the science and he knows the area, right? It's always going to that point. Is you look for a scientist, you can interview a scientist. You don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be a conservation. You can just be interested in the ocean and the well-being of the ocean and getting that right information out there. That could be your mission, is get the information out there. Because once we get more information out there, more people are going to get eyeballs on it, and we're going to be able to get more people to care about the ocean, to have hope for the ocean, and have optimism for the ocean, instead of this constantly being in fear and negativity and doom and gloom. And so if you want to start a podcast, if you want to start some kind of communication, I want you to go to speakupforblue.com/comms, COMMS, COMMS. I'm going to have a landing page there. You put your email in there. I'm going to start a group. It's going to be a paid membership. I'm going to start a group. We're going to meet like twice monthly, and we're going to talk about starting you on your path to communication. We're going to go through the entire gamut of what you need to do to start. What I did to start my podcast and my communication journey. It doesn't have to be a podcast. It could be short form content. It could be quick content. It just has to be good content. And good, it means entertaining and informational. Informational first, right? And you'll get better and better and better at your messaging. And I promise you'll feel better about yourself because you're going to be one of those people who provides facts to others. And we need people now. So go to speakupforblue.com/comms, COMMS, and that's where you need to go. Sign up. And there's no payment. I just want to see who's interested. We're going to start a group. Our first cohort's going to start. Maybe we'll start it in like mid-September, but I want to see who's interested. And then I'll talk about price and everything like that after, but it won't be expensive. I just want more and more people to start. So hit me up, speakupforblue.com/comms, COMMS, and I will see you there. And I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode. I guess if you want to have questions or anything like that, hit me up on Instagram at speakupforblue, or not at speakupforblue, at How to Protect the Ocean. On Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. Just DM me, and I'd be more than happy to chat with you about the program or about anything else about the podcast. If you do follow me on Instagram, I might hit you up and just be like, hey, are you a listener? Get information from you. I just want to have a chat. I'm always interested in chatting with followers and stuff on Instagram and all my TikToks and everything like that. But anyway, that's it for today's episode of How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day and happy conservation.